Oh, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all, wherever you are watching this on this absolutely wonderful planet we live on. Today, I want to talk about two things, maybe more, probably two. The first one is the generations and how I feel that's happening for stuff in the world today. And the next, to lead on from the generations, I guess, will be inheritance, which is an interesting thing, I believe, for things that are happening around me. Anywho, do that thing down the bottom, with the smash and stuff, and share. No, do like, because like's a good thing because it helps things. So they say. I have no real knowing if it does or not, but just do the like. Do me a favour. Now, so the generations, from what I understand the generations to be, and of course not an expert, but let me just bring this up on my screen so I can read out what they are. So when they started recording generations as we know them now, the labelling them with things was around the into the turn of the 20th century, like 1901. And that generation was called the Greatest Generation. And that spanned around 25, 26 years. And the people in the Greatest Generation obviously lived through the World War One, which was the war to end all wars, and then they lived through the beginning of the Great Depression, and that was pretty horrendous, and that was marked. The end of that generation, moving into the next one, was either when the Great Depression happened, or it was over. I'm not sure of the dates, and I'm not a full historian, but you can work that out yourself. The next generation from there was called the Silent Generation. Now they either lived through the end of the Great Depression and through World War II, and that lasted from, 1928 through to 1945. So that actually dropped down from what was 26 years to not quite 20. So it was like 20, let me do the maths, about 23 years, right? Maybe 25, we can work that out. I don't care. So it was about 20 years. Now, after the Silent Generation, which again lived through World War II, and that was the marking of the end of that generation, World War II, became the baby boomers. And of course, that's what I am. I'm a baby boomer. And the baby boomers are known for lots of different things, but a lot of the millennials blame the baby boomers for the current crisis we're in. And I think I might get into that if I can understand, or if I want to go there today. The baby boomers ended around 1963. And then maybe some people say as late as 65. I'm looking at this and it's saying 1965, where it then became known as Gen X. And Gen X, Vietnam War started. We were in the war. That ended the baby boomers stuff, and then it moved into there. So at the end of the baby boomers, the people born in 1965, they were growing into prominence while the Gen Xers were growing into whatever they were growing into. So let's say you're born in 1960. When you were coming into your adolescence in when you were 15, like 1975, most of the Gen X was still juvenile and weren't really ready to start any major impact in the world. And the baby boomers started. I actually believe the baby boomers are responsible for wealth, growing of the industry where we are. Home life became better. Well, maybe that was the end of the Silent Generation, because they actually the baby boomers built it from the war forward, or the Silent Generation did. Nuclear families were still intact. People were still doing community work. They were fit and strong and healthy. They weren't morbidly obese. And then in that time, that generation between 1960 and 1970, not the generation, sorry, that decade of the 60s, a lot of things started to be brought in, like psychologists and social workers and all of the things that I believe the baby boomers brought in, and maybe the end of the lost generation, brought all these things in to help out the future generations, like the Gen X's and the Gen Y's. And I think the Gen Y's they came in the mid 70s, maybe 1980, and then they were the millennials, and they went through to about 97, and then you get Gen Z, and then that went through to about 2010 maybe. Then there's the Gen A or Alpha and Gen B, Beta, which has not really started anything yet. But let's go back to the baby boomers and the end of the lost generation. They started this place where we're at now. So we as baby boomers are responsible and have to take responsibility or accountability, this goes back to my last video, of the stuff that has been created from today. Now, things stopped around that time, like when the Gen X was growing into their things stopped at school. Technology started to be implemented in school. I remember going to upper high school and we didn't have calculators. We weren't allowed to use scientific calculators. Everything was done on sheets and we had to do cosines and tangents and things from charts and work it out with formulas. And then around that time, they started introducing calculators, not for us, because we were finishing school, but for the generation after us, like the Gen X's. And they started using technology. And as far as I can see, the implementation of technology in schooling from the baby boomers, not so much us, again, let's say Gen X, from the Gen X generation up to today, has forever been increasing. Like more technology, less using your brain function, more relying on something other than your brain to give you the answer that you're looking for. So you had to go through this process of understanding how to use a calculator. And I actually remember someone saying the new skill is not working out the charts, it's actually working out how to use a calculator. So instead of me relying on my mind to work out the times tables, I just go, well, 12 times 12, I just go 12 times 12 equals, and I've learned a new skill by pushing buttons on a calculator, but I've lost a fantastically relevant skill on using my brain to calculate what 12 times 12 is. And that started by the beginning of the baby boomers, the 45ers and on, and maybe to not so much me at the end of it, but Gen X was the first to suffer from the baby boomers' want to make the generation following them better than theirs. Like, I think every generation hopes for that, but most generations prior to, baby boomers and the Gen X, all they ever wanted was to teach their children work ethics, to be a decent human being, maybe go to church, be a community operator, and there are the values that we wanted to give our children for them to move forward. And use your brain, go to school, get an education, and become smarter than us. Not have more things than us, not have more technology to make them literally lazier than us. We wanted them to be better than us. So from baby boomers, the early part of the baby boomers, they've actually made, in my view, the world easier with technology, but the world worse because the brain function of the generations after the baby boomers have gradually been going down and down and down. So I would say Gen X was probably on par with the baby boomers. The millennials, Gen Y, then they started to become really entitled, right? I don't know of really any Gen Y who owns and takes responsibility for shit. They just, almost every Gen Y I know is a entitled, over and opinionated arsehat. That's not, sorry, I've got to say that's not actually not true. I know some really good Gen Ys that are probably closer to Gen X and millennials because they've got to focus on work. They understand what they need to do for family, which is actually an older generational thing. It's not a Gen Y, Gen Z thing. Then you move into Gen Zs, which the technology was bombarded into them from their developmental ages in the 2000s. And then they've actually got worse. Now they're the ones that probably think they're the best, the most aware, the most whatever, but they're actually probably the least heading into the Gen Alphas. It's just getting, I don't know fully about what's going on with it. So all I've got to look at this is and go, the majority of Gen Y and Gen Z are, I think they've lost. I think they're lost. I don't know if they understand where they are. They rely on either telling absolutely no one they're going through issues or a counsellor. But they don't talk to their friends. They, in my experience, most of that generation runs away from family obligation and family ties. They're actually quite easily to cut the ties. Like, I don't give a crap, they'll say. And until they want their family ties, until they need their family, right? Then they come back. which is a little bit weird in itself. The baby boomers and Gen X was still a little bit family centered. They would pretty much devote their life to their family, children, maybe brothers and sisters, depending on how estranged they may be. Definitely their parents, like without doubt. Most Gen Xers were dedicated to the family unit as such, and I would not call my father or my mother every day, which I think would be abuse, me abusing them, but I'd regularly stay in touch, and it was my obligation to do that. I had a discussion with my father about that, and I've probably mentioned it in the past, but it was, he told me, why don't I ring him? And I just said, look, Dad, I've got a life, But the reality is, I did ring him more because I knew he was retired and he didn't have so much of a life that I had. So it was my obligation to make that effort for him. And I did. And Mum, of course, both the same. My brother and I contact each other as regularly as we think about each other. And, well, maybe not that regular, because I think of Adrian a bit, and I'm not sure he thinks of me a bit. But when it's really in our mind, we ring each other, which is really cool. We have estranged people in our family, and I think every family has that. And you reach out to the family member often and often and often, and it gets slapped away, then you stop reaching. But my hand's never not there to take that hand if it's offered back. So, and I think that's a baby boomer mindset. So Gen X is very close to that. Gen Y, Gen Z, pulling away from it. I'm going to preempt something by thinking the Gen Alphas and the Gen Betas, when they get to age, they're going to totally abandon their family, totally walk away from their parents, because I would say most Gen Z millennial parents are so entitled that they don't even realise the stuff they're doing to their Gen Alpha, Gen Beta children. It's actually interesting to have a look at. And I think if you were to get down and have a really good look at it, you'll see, like in everything, right, there's always this 80-20 rule, right? So 80-20 baby boomers, 80% of them were family focused, 20% weren't. Gen X, probably the same. It started to then swing the other way, where I would say Gen Y, millennials and Gen Z are more heading towards the 80-20, the opposite, where only 20% of them are family focused and devoted to their family unit, where 80% they just run. They just walk away, don't take any responsibility and leave that. And I know it's not a long time in our history of human nature or humankind, because it's really only 60 years, maybe let's say 70 years, 80 years at the most, from beginning of baby boomers to where we are now. But in that 80-year period, we've seen a whole bunch of cultural things happen. The baby boomers were the ones who developed and brought money in and created this wealth for their youth and giving them everything they wanted. Then it started to deteriorate again. Let's go to Gen Y and Gen Zs, who see their parents with things, hopefully not in my case, but in most cases, and then they expect those parents to feed them money and things because they always have. And that's the baby boomer and Gen Y's fault for forever giving in to the children, and the Gen Ys and I can't even get the generations, like the millennials, the Gen X's and the baby boomers fed the Gen Ys and the Gen Z's everything. And then they now become entitled and believe they should have everything supplied by their parents instead of going to get it themselves. Right, so that's just, like, I'm just noticing that in things that I'm saying. So that sort of moves me into the next phase of this talk today, this rant and rabbit at you, is inheritance. From the greatest generation through to the lost generation through to baby boomers, it was all about accumulating wealth and hoping our children would be better off than us. And if we could possibly do so, we'd leave something to them. And then it became really important that we did. Then it started to become into the Gen X's and Gen Y's that they actually believed that their parents must leave them something. And if the parents don't, then there's something wrong with the parents. And then it goes into the Gen Ys, end of Gen Ys and maybe Gen Zs, where they almost expect them to. I don't think that's probably not true. But I find a lot of them aren't working. We did see a show on ABC Australia, which is the Australian Broadcasting Commission, government-funded program about this sort of conversation. And one Gen Zer who had gone to university wanted a $150,000 a year job. Then he said, "Oh, look, I'm not so sure about it because my mum's going to leave me all of her money and I'll be okay." And I thought, what an a-hole! Like, what? If I was the mother, I would just cut him out of the will instantly. I'd leave him absolutely nothing. It's absolutely insane. So he was just waiting for her to die. And he actually said in this show, "I'm waiting for my mother to die." Oh, I couldn't believe it. It was my wife and I were just shaking our heads at the absurdity of that claim. But it was reflective because there was another person in there who was a young woman she was another Gen Zer who actually believed that she was entitled to a very, very well-paid job, like in the six figures, and she wasn't comfortable working from home unless she lived on the beach. So, and she was saying how hard it was to buy a home. Now, her wage was probably $170,000 or $180,000 a year, and she could have easily afforded a house in the hills, but she didn't want to do that because she wanted to live on the beach near her parents, who lived on the beach. Not taking into account that these baby boomer parents had spent their whole life working hard, started off on a small house in the hills and worked their way up to a nice house down by the beach. She just wanted the big house by the beach now and was upset with the government process of not being able to give her that wish that she wanted. And I got to say, as a baby boomer, it's technically our fault and the Generation X's fault as well. But it just gives you an idea of the most Gen Zers don't dream, or Gen and millennials, like both of them, they don't dream of getting their first home in a small place with 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom and a carport or something over their car. They dream of a big house, like on a big block, 5 bedrooms, or a huge big property that they can run everything, with dams and farms and that sort of stuff. I'm going, oh, guys, have the dream, but let's get real. You've got to start somewhere. Like, you've got to get a really well-paid job. You've got to stay in it for long enough to get enough for the bank to want to lend you money. And they just dream these big dreams and then wonder why nothing happens. But they rely, maybe 80% of them do, on the baby boomers' money that's come to them. So let's move into the next part, this inheritance thing. As a baby boomer, if our parents died, we didn't expect anything from them because we were actually given a work ethic. We were taught to work hard, to be a kind, considerate person. So we actually didn't expect anything from our parents. And those that did were that 20%ers. They were the ones that were just greedy and lazy people and weren't prepared to go out and do things for themselves. Gen X, pretty much the same. They would take on that line. Towards the end of the Gen X, like in that early 80s, they started to see that, hey, maybe my mum and dad, who are like 35, 40 years old, have got good money behind them. Maybe they'll leave me something, because we as baby boomers started to say to them, we're getting a nest egg so we can leave you something when we pass. And then it became cool. I don't have to work as hard because my parents can leave me something. They've got this really nice house, beautiful property. And so I won't work as hard as them, but I'm still going to work, but not as hard as them, knowing that I don't just save as much or get as big a thing, because in the end I'll get some of their money. And some of them took that forward into the Gen Ys and then to the Gen Zs, and they're still in this hanging on for money. So in my belief, right, and again, I'm not really in the position because I don't have a lot of money, but I would only leave things to people in my will who were actively participating in my life. Right now, I know people from, friends from 10 years ago that we were really active, we were really good friends. They're not in my life anymore through circumstance of moving house or just drift apart. I don't feel obliged to leave them anything in my will. Now, that could be said the same for family members, like my brother or my sister. Like, I'll leave something to my brother if I'm in a position to do so because he's actively in my life. I won't leave anything to my sister because she's not actively in my life. So if children don't participate. Don't make an effort to be part of that parent's life. I don't believe that the parents should be obliged to leave them anything in their will. It's sort of like, I would rather leave it to people. So let's say, like, what am I, 66 now? I've probably got, if I'm lucky, 20 years. Let's say 20 years. The medicines might keep me alive longer, but let's go 20 years. Maybe 10, like anywhere between that. And you've got to be realistic, People are in my life now and actively in my life making an effort. I think they're the ones, if I've got anything left, I'll leave it to. Obviously, my wife gets it first. But those that aren't and have made a conscious effort not to, then I don't believe I should leave anything to them. And they may hate me for it, and they say, well, that's fine, because I'll be dead. I won't really give a shit. But if you keep reaching and those people don't want it, then why would you? Why would you leave anything to them? Why would you give them anything? It isn't a one-way street, guys. Inheritance is a two-way thing. For those who are lucky enough to have money and who stupidly give their money away to those people in their life who have not done anything for 25, 30 years in their life, hoping that in death they're going to love them, well, they're idiots. They're just idiots. The people who get something after that person's died are just going to go, yeah, I got money. Big deal. I still hate him. I still hate her. She's still a bitch. He's still a bastard. Why? I just now got money. And I'm going to make whatever excuse I want to thank someone else for it. But the fact is, they don't deserve any of it. So I guess those of you who are out there who have money, really look at why you want to leave it to people in your life who aren't actively in your life. I don't know why you would do that. I just think that there are so many more people around you who are actively in your life today, good friends, for example. You leave something to them. If you're a church person, leave some to the church, but please don't leave all of it to the church because they get enough money anyway. Give it to a worthwhile charity. No, don't give it to a charity. Oh, God. Too much admin costs go to charities and very little goes out. Find friends. Give your money to your friends who you know are going to do something with it, who will actively in your life, who will actively remember you and actively benefit. That's to me is what it is. And those who aren't part of your life, don't give them anything. And that's from a person who has nothing. So it's easy for me to say that. Like I can leave, my sea container and a caravan to my wife. I'll then leave a sea container and a caravan to whoever she wants to. So I guess the reality is inheritance isn't a given, and it shouldn't be a given. You shouldn't, I shouldn't expect anything from my parents who are dead, so I can't. I don't anyway. But, people in a Gen Ys, Gen Xs, or maybe Gen X, shouldn't expect money from their early baby boomers or late of the lost generation parents. But if they do, like, it's a bonus. Like, wow, thank you very much. I didn't expect it. I wasn't expecting any of that. But I believe from Gen Y and up down to where we are now, it's just ever increasing those steps of expectation of something coming to them when their parent passes. And I think that's really sad. And that's just my perspective. It's again my opinion, and like everybody, they've got I've got one too, and my opinion is that. And it might change in 2 weeks, and I'll bring that back up and say, oh, my opinion's changed. And I think it now needs to be this. And this is what part of rabbiting on and having a conversation is all about, that we are actually able to change our opinions and not feel guilty for having the one we had yesterday. Because that's what growth and maturity is. What I had and what I said yesterday is not really relevant today. Holding on to yesterday stops me going forward and actually destroys my today. So I'm not going to do that. As for inheritance, I'm leaving everything I have to my wife. She can deal with the mess. And what she does with that is up to her, But for what it's worth, I just don't believe anybody here should be expecting inheritance from anyone. I just think it's a bonus if you get it, whatever it may be. And then don't complain if you don't get as much as you wanted from an inheritance and then go to court over it because you weren't active in their life. Then, stiff shit, man. be more active, get what you get. Not active, then whatever comes, it's a bonus to you. Anyway, that's it. I don't know if it's a short one. Got no timer. Don't really care. But just remember this. And of course, farewell, adieu, sayonara, avita, saying goodbye, something like that. Anyway, until next time I'm start rabbiting at you and talking at you, have a good day. Enjoy your journey. And, always be good.